What if I told you that the site of the worst nuclear disaster in human history isn't some dead, glowing wasteland, but is actually teeming with life? Sounds completely impossible, right? But the true story of Chernobyl is absolutely packed with these kinds of shocking contradictions. To figure out how this landscape was literally reborn, we've got to separate the Hollywood myths from historical reality. For decades, pop culture has fed us these exaggerated tales of mutant monsters and guaranteed suicide missions. Today, we're cutting through all that fiction in this explainer to look at the cold, hard facts. And honestly, the truth is far more terrifying, fascinating, and weirdly inspiring than anything you've seen in the movies.
Act 1. The Fateful Night and the Heroes.
We kick things off on the night of April 25, 1986. The sequence of events reveals an incredibly tense, ticking clock escalation of what was supposed to be just a routine safety test. The operators started dialing back the power on Unit 4, but thanks to a bunch of unexpected delays, they ended up holding the reactor in a super unstable state for hours. Just past midnight on April 26th, the power completely plummets to an unintended 30 megawatts. By the time they tried to recover and finally slammed the AZ5 emergency shutdown button at 1:23 a.m., it was just too late. Seconds later, massive explosions absolutely obliterated the building. In the hours leading right up to the blast, there was this absolutely terrifying drop in power levels. This steep decline, combined with the inherently dangerous design flaws of the Soviet RBM K-1000 reactor, mainly its total lack of a protective containment structure and severe instability at low power, created a literal powder keg. And the crazy part is, kept completely in the dark about these critical design flaws, the operators had absolutely no idea the test they were running was pushing the reactor right into a catastrophic runaway reaction.
The sheer, raw bravery of the first responders is just staggering. Firefighters were on the scene within minutes, battling flames shooting 100 feet into the night sky. Guys like Vladimir Pravik and Vasily Ignatenko unknowingly stepped right into a completely lethal zone. Since it was a warm spring night, some of them were literally fighting this apocalyptic blaze in simple t-shirts without helmets. They later reported tasting metal in the air, which is a terrifying classic symptom of extreme radiation exposure. Witnesses even described the skin of these men turning brown, almost like a deep tan, or bright red almost instantly from the sheer intensity of the radiation.
Now, we really need to correct a massive historical misconception here. Hollywood loves to tell this dramatic story about 3 divers who volunteered for a guaranteed suicide mission to drain the reactor's flooded basement, supposedly dying of acute radiation sickness within weeks. Well, the astonishing reality? They were just regular plant workers, Alexei, Valery, and Boris, who were simply given an order to go in. They waded through the radioactive water in wetsuits, successfully opened the valves, and they survived. All of them. In fact, 2 of those men are still alive today.
And the heroism definitely didn't stop in the basement. Thousands of tons of highly radioactive graphite debris had been blown right onto the roof. At first, the Soviets tried using these remote-controlled lunar rovers to clear it, but the radiation was so intense it literally fried the robots' electronics. So what did they do? They deployed human biorobots. Men wearing these heavy, homemade lead aprons would sprint out onto the roof, shovel maybe 2 or 3 scoops of radioactive debris over the edge, and run back inside. They could only work for exactly 2 minutes before hitting their absolute lifetime limit for radiation exposure. Just wrap your head around that.
Act 2. The Soviet cover-up and the monster.
31. That is the official number of immediate deaths the Soviet government originally reported to the public. It really highlights the absolute absurdity of the state cover-up in the immediate aftermath. Behind closed doors, officials knew they were dealing with a massive, continent-spanning catastrophe, but they still tried to downplay the whole thing, feeding completely bogus and incomplete information to the media to save face and prevent a massive panic. The leadership tried so desperately to suppress the true sequence of events, actually keeping the news entirely out of the press for almost 3 full days. It wasn't until this massive radioactive cloud drifted all the way across Europe and literally set off radiation alarms at a nuclear plant in Sweden that the Soviets were finally painfully forced to admit to the world what had actually happened.
The elephant's foot. Meanwhile, deep underground, while the world panicked, scientists exploring the pitch-black, highly radioactive maintenance corridors beneath Reactor 4 discovered something straight out of a horror movie. It was this massive, glassy lump of melted nuclear fuel, concrete, and sand that had flowed like lava and then solidified. Because of its weird, wrinkled, bulky shape, they dubbed it the elephant's foot. When they first found it, this monstrous mass was emitting a staggering 10,000 roentgens per hour.
To put that into perspective for you, that means it would deliver a 50-50 lethal dose of radiation to anyone standing near it in under 3 minutes. It was, quite literally, one of the most dangerous objects on the entire planet.
Scientists urgently needed to figure out exactly what this corium lava was made of, but it was unbelievably dense. I mean, it was so hardened and stubborn that remote-controlled drills couldn't even dent the thing. So what's the solution? They actually had to call in a police marksman. No joke. He had to literally shoot the elephant's foot with an armor-piercing round from an AK-47 rifle just to chip off a tiny piece for chemical analysis.
Act 3. Life finds a way.
Now, if you were expecting the exclusion zone today to look like a sterile, post-apocalyptic wasteland, you'd be completely wrong. The sudden disappearance of human traffic, farming, and hunting has basically given nature a free pass to take over. Apex predators and massive herbivores are completely reclaiming the zone in numbers nobody saw coming. We're talking brown bears coming back, European bison, and super-rare Przewalski's horses just roaming freely. There are even beavers recolonizing the very cooling ponds that were built for the nuclear reactors. It's wild to think about, but the simple absence of everyday human disturbance turned out to be a more powerful force for nature than a literal nuclear fallout.
But, the radiation is definitely still there, and because of it, we are watching evolution happen right before our eyes. Take the eastern tree frogs living inside the zone, for example. Today, they are on average 40% darker than the exact same frogs living outside the zone. Some have even lost their green coloring entirely and turned pitch black. This is hyper-fast adaptation. The frogs are literally pumping out higher levels of melanin. Yep, the exact same pigment that gives us a suntan, to protect their cellular tissues from radiation damage.
And life just keeps adapting in these truly bizarre ways. Researchers have found dark, melanin-rich fungi growing right inside the ruined reactor walls, basically feeding off an extreme environment that would quickly kill almost anything else. Then you have hundreds of feral dogs, the descendants of pets that were tragically abandoned back in 1996, roaming the zone. Now, they aren't glowing mutants or anything, but studies do show they are genetically diverging from other dogs purely because of their isolation. And those forests, the ones that were eerily, terrifyingly silent for years after the blast, they are once again totally loud with returning birdsong.
But it isn't just plants and animals out there. Human life persists here too. Meet the Samozli, the self-settlers. They're also beautifully called the returners. We're talking about roughly 130 elderly residents who just straight up defied military evacuation orders so they could live out their lives in their ancestral villages right inside the zone. They quietly eat potatoes and tomatoes grown in their own gardens, they keep chickens, and they live surprisingly long, peaceful lives because they are just that deeply attached to their motherland. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty haunting question. We've seen absolute destruction, unbelievable bravery, and this astonishing biological rebirth. But what does it really say that the world's worst nuclear disaster ended up creating a sanctuary for nature that our human civilization never could? It is a profound paradox, and one that really forces us to rethink our entire relationship with this planet. Keep questioning, keep learning, and thanks for exploring the true story of Chernobyl with us.